Living with a life-changing medical condition not only affects our physical self, it affects our emotional self, our social self, and our sense of who we are. How do we adjust and not just live but thrive? Find out next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center, and tonight we're taking your questions on coping with a life-changing medical condition. So call the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. And of course, you can always text us your questions or email them using the number or address listed at the bottom of your screen. We're going to start by introducing our guest. Dr. Doug Heck is a licensed psychologist with the Duluth Psychological Clinic who specializes in treating individuals who've had a life-changing health crisis. And Lori Schneider became the first person in the world with multiple sclerosis to summit Mount Everest. She's an inspirational speaker and the founder of Empowerment Through Adventure. Thanks to both of you for being here this evening. I think it's very fitting that on the coldest night of the year so far, we have someone on who's summited Mount Everest. And I have to say, you're also the first guest who I've introduced where I've been able to say the first person in the world, and and you might be the last person too. But
I hope not.
But I think I'd like to start, Lori, with you sort of telling your story. We're going to have her tell her story in pieces to kind of keep you hooked in through the whole show. And the first part of the story, which was just getting the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, and then your reaction to that, your initial reaction to that.
I'll never forget the day. It was January 4th, 1999. I woke up one morning, swung my leg out of bed. I was going to get up and use my treadmill that morning, and one side of my body had gone numb overnight, as if someone had drawn a line down the middle. One side was numb, one wasn't. And I panicked and called the doctor, and they said come in right away, and they tested me for stroke and Lyme's disease, lupus, MS, even brain cancer over the weeks, because they'd actually misread the very first test. But when I was told I had MS, my life fell apart for a while. I ran away from a 22-year marriage, a 20-year teaching career. I left my home and community, just feeling like I had to do everything I could before I was in a wheelchair, because they thought that my MS was probably progressing pretty rapidly. So, you know, my story is one of running away from life, but really rebuilding my life again and getting my courage and strength back. And for me, I did that through mountain climbing.
And so that initial crisis, in terms of the work that you do, where does that fit in terms of the spectrum of responses in the people who you work with and what you've seen?
Well, I think what you described, in my opinion, is common in terms of the process that happened for you, in terms of an initial reaction that was full of fear and all sorts of strong emotions. What you ended up doing with that is a little bit unusual compared to most people I work with. But across most people that I've worked with, there is an initial reaction that's quite varied. From some people are very calm and say, you know, I don't know what this is all about, but I'm going to find a way through this somehow, up to people who have a catastrophic reaction, and they just feel a complete loss of any kind of balance or any kind of grounding, any kind of future, and they're literally without any direction. And so anywhere in between there is where people typically end up to begin with.
A wide range of responses.
A wide range. And it really varies. It really varies based on who the person is and what the condition is and their situation.
Because people bring things to that experience, right? You know, so it's not just the diagnosis that is having an impact at that moment. It's who you were 10 minutes before that that diagnosis as well. Yeah. So your initial response is, I am on the run.
That's about it.
And
I didn't stop running for about a dozen years. No, I actually started running literally as a form of exercise, and I needed to challenge myself physically, fearing that I was going to lose the ability to walk soon. And so part of my running away from life process was finding myself and my physical strength. But what I realized was I gained really inner strength and comfort through, first of all, feeling like I had in some ways overcome my illness. You don't overcome MS, but in my world, I was getting stronger instead of weaker because I was working my body. But mentally, I got so much stronger over those dozen years that I started to climb a peak, and then I would wait a couple years, save money, and think, oh, I'm still healthy. Let me try something else. And, you know, and I realize now that I don't define myself by my legs and my body anymore. I define myself by who I am inside, and
Absolutely.
I think that person is strong enough to climb whatever mountains in life come along.
And go ahead.
Well, and what you're saying is so important, because what happens, I think, when somebody has a health crisis or gets a diagnosis or realizes that they have a life-threatening condition is not just about the medical aspects, but it's about their identity and who they are. And so many of us have a sense of who we are based on what we do every day and our relationships and what we do with our children and all sorts of things like that. And within a moment, all of that can be gone, or the vision of it can be gone. And so people oftentimes struggle at the beginning because they're not sure who they are anymore, how they're going to continue to be who they were. And it sounds like your pathway allowed you to find, again, another way about saying, this is who I am and this is what I have within me. And this is the path that so many people go down, but in different ways.
And I think that whole identity piece is that it's really difficult for us, I think, not to get into that pattern of identifying ourselves by what we do or what we can do, as opposed to the kind of human being I am and how I'm living my life. And if you have a life-changing medical condition, especially one where maybe there are certain things you cannot do anymore, or you have to learn to do differently, where, you know, maybe if you were an athlete and now you cannot participate in your sport because of that, and your fears kind of were about that, where there's the sense of loss about identity of who am I.
Yeah. And for me, I was embarrassed and ashamed, and I hid my diagnosis for a year from everyone, and I eventually told my parents after, 4 or 5 months, but I didn't tell anybody else for a year because I didn't want people feeling sorry for me. But what I realized was I was still grieving for myself, and the people in my life who loved and cared about me still loved and cared about me, and it didn't matter that I had this label, but in my mind I didn't want people to know. And now it's not my calling card, but I'm not ashamed or embarrassed to say I have MS, because we all have things in our life. Mine happens to have a label of MS. People can have, financial mountains to climb. They can have illness problems. They can have relationship problems. We all have problems and mountains to climb, and we just have to find a way to move beyond those and not let those labels define how we feel about ourselves.
I agree.
The embarrassment and shame, is that something that you see with the people that you work with as well?
Absolutely. and a lot of other strong feelings, strong fear, strong uncertainty about what's ahead. So many people feel ashamed and then react to that shame by doing as you do. They hide their condition, or they feel that they're not worthy of being out in the world anymore, so they go home from the hospital or the doctor's office and they isolate and they cut off all the various people in their world, and then they become at risk for becoming really depressed and really unhappy and really into a deep hole. So one of the things that is so important is to be able to treat the person and help the person as a whole person, spiritually, emotionally, physically, medically. And this is one of the things that I think that we are hoping to do with this program, is to help people see that people are not just a body, or people are not just an occupation, that they're a whole person, and we need to be able to help the whole person and have them help all of themselves to be able to get better.
And I love that notion. I'm so glad that you brought that up, Doug, that we're not just a body, because I think, I don't know that, that right at this moment I think of myself as just a body, but if tomorrow I get a life-changing medical condition, all of a sudden that's what my focus becomes, as if that's how I've always defined myself, as by my body, forgetting about these,
Sure.
that, oh yeah, there are these other aspects of myself that,
Sure.
that deserve equal attention in order to live that full and rich life. So Lori, have you always faced every challenge in your life by deciding, I think I'll climb Mount Everest? Because I've been thinking about this, and when I was thinking about the show this evening, I just have to tell you that if tomorrow I get diagnosed with Mount Everest, if I get diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I will not be climbing Mount Everest. That's not on my list. And how does that, is that the way you approach challenges in your life, was to set these lofty goals?
Well, actually, about a dozen years before the diagnosis of MS, I had climbed Kilimanjaro with my father. And it was just a dream of his to do that sometime. So I had a little bit of that idea of, getting out in the world on a mountaintop in my head. But when I got diagnosed, I wanted to accelerate and do all the physical things that I could while I could. And so I started climbing mountains just to see how far I could push the limits of my MS. So I did Aconcagua a year after the day I woke up numb. I climbed that with my father, and I thought, maybe I'll do another of the 7 summits, the highest peak on each continent. So every couple of years I did one, but I thought I would do them all but Everest, because I thought that's too hard for me. Right now I'm 55. I was 52 when I summited. I thought, I'm too old, I have MS, I'm a woman. That's what everybody told me. And I had to give myself permission to just try. And that's my goal. My goal wasn't to stand on top of any of the mountains. I hoped that I could get there. But I wanted to give myself permission to try, because I felt like my failure would be in giving up on things that I love to do. And that's, when I go around and speak, that's what I talk about. It's like, believe in yourself enough to give yourself permission to try some things.
Talk about that.
These are the things that I love listening to you, because you're talking about so many things that so many other people are wrestling with and trying to figure out, and you figured them out in an amazing way. And I have great respect for what you've done. Part of what I'm hearing you talk about is being able to have a plan for how you want to proceed from your diagnosis, and also being able to have a positive view of yourself, and being able to tolerate strong emotions. These are qualities of a part of people that we call resilience, and being able to bounce back from adversity. And so having those qualities oftentimes allows people to find a path. And you found yours. There may be somebody else who finds a path through their Everest, might be setting a goal as 6 months after my stroke, I'm going to walk out to my mailbox on my own, and I'm going to get my mail. And that's their Everest.
And it's an amazing goal.
Oh,
and
it's just
it
so,
is.
but they've set a plan, and they've felt good about themselves, and they were able to follow that and make some steps, and that's often what helps people get through.
And to do that, I think that walk to the mailbox has to involve that same permission to try, because it's not the same walk to the mailbox that they were able to do 2 years ago.
Correct.
And so that's about making peace and making friends with this new body.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe instead of seeing my body as a source of betrayal to
Yes.
me, but how can I make peace and make friends with my body?
Mm-hmm.
And you can still be successful even if you're not very good at something. You know, I know that I'm not the strongest or the best at what I do
I
when
say
I get
that-
up there climbing. I know I'm not. You know, I'm always surrounded by men who are stronger and, you know, generally have more experience. But you learn to do the things that you want to do, and then you just, like I said, give it a shot and realize that you can still be successful even though you didn't look pretty doing it. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what you're talking about too, what I hear in this conversation, what both of you are talking about, is that these tremendous life-changing events in our life, whether it's getting a medical diagnosis, but it could be other tremendous life-changing events, it gives us this opportunity to learn something about ourselves. And in this country, there is such this emphasis on outcome and success and perfection, and not a whole lot of emphasis on process.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're talking about is the process. To quote Miley Cyrus, it's the climb, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the summit. It's the climb.
It's the getting there.
It's the getting there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question here, Doug, from a caller in Superior. I have epilepsy and don't feel like I can connect with my doctor to get the help I need. What can I do? And you would recommend what?
Well, having a good relationship with your medical team is essential. And I oftentimes talk to people about how if you feel that there's a relationship difficulty with your physician or your medical team, it's the same as having a relationship difficulty with someone else that's important in your life. It's important to be able to sit down with that person and see to what you can do about trying to repair the relationship in some way. And first finding out whether it's possible to improve the relationship in some way. And that's the main thing that I would talk to this person about doing. I think it's sometimes we have just very little time with our medical care providers, and so oftentimes I encourage people to take in 1 or 2 questions, and maybe the first one for this person might be, you know what, I feel like I'd really like to be able to hear more from you. I'd really feel like I want a little bit more help with something else. Can we talk about something different today? And sometimes that can help improve the relationship.
And I always advocate, I know with the people who I work with, is that you have to be able to have trust in the person who you're working with. You should feel like a valued member of your team, not just a person who's being consulted on, but a person who's being who's participating in the consultation. And what's your experience been with that?
You know, I've had such positive experience with my neurologist in Madison, and when I go in, his first words are, "What can I do for you today? How can I help you? You know, what are you worried about?" And that's a different approach than some of the medical, you know, advice and diagnosis that I had early on. And I really love the fact that this person is here to help me, and it allows me to feel more open to talking about things, not just how are my reflexes today and where do I have numbness and tingling, and it's not a clinical talk, but he's really looking at the whole person.
The importance of family and friends, the Sherpas on a person's on a person's journey. Talk a little bit about that, Doug.
Well, when we look at studies about people that do well from from bouncing back from a health crisis, one of the things that stands out amongst a lot of studies is that it's the quality of relationships that people have that can help people through. Oftentimes it's people who are isolated or without really close relationships that may struggle with going home and being alone or not having someone there for available emotional support. And so it's very important. And if it's not there for someone, then I work sometimes with people in the hospital who are getting ready to go home. And if we know they're going home to a setting in which there's not a lot of support, we really work on trying to make that a part of their environment at home, because it's essential.
In your experience, Lori?
You know, we had life Sherpas on Everest. We had Sherpas, but they were really life Sherpas to me in a lot of ways. And what I realized was that it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to take help with simple things. I mean, summit night, you know, it's 20 below zero with the wind, you know, pitch dark, 3 in the morning.
We're glad we could recreate that
Yes.
for you tonight.
And I remember I was thirsty, and you've got big down mittens on, and I was trying to get out my gel and my water, you know, to hydrate and get my nutrition. And he said, no, he didn't want me taking off my big down gloves because frostbite would end the climb in a matter of minutes. And he had very thick, tough skin, and he had thinner gloves on. So he unzips my coat, reaches in the chest pocket, takes out my gel because you have to hide them so they won't freeze, opens it, squeezes it in my mouth, gives me water. I felt like I was one of the kindergartners that I used to teach. And it was a wonderful experience of just letting go and saying, it's okay, I need help. You're here to help me, and I can accept that. And I think with my MS, I've had to do that too and say, you know, if I need help understanding, or early on, I dealt with depression when I was first diagnosed for about a year. And I finally said, okay, somebody help me through this. And I went on medication for about a year and really started to feel better about myself and life again. And I think we have to learn that it's okay to let other people be our Sherpas.
You know, there was a woman on National Public Radio on the segments. I don't know if either one of you listened to that on this I Believe, where you do an essay on what you believe. And she was a dancer who had been diagnosed with ALS and felt that what she believed was that experience for her was the experience of having ALS was to teach her how to reach out to other people, because she had been so resistant to that in her life. And again, in America, we grow up in the country of the land of independence, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do it by yourself, and that's how we measure strength, is your ability to be independent, not your ability to reach out necessarily when you need help.
Yeah, and actually people end up being mentally and perhaps physically stronger if they can learn to be able to reach out. It's oftentimes people are much more at risk if they don't have that capacity to do that. And then by reaching out, they find that many people feel like they're going to be a burden. And oftentimes I feel like they don't realize that it's a very meaningful experience for the person helping them to be able to help them as well, and that they can become stronger through that process. One thing that's interesting that I have learned over the years and about working with all the wonderful people I've come into contact with and learning about their journeys is that there's a kind of a phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. And what that is and we're really studying it more now, and really learning about how sometimes health crises can result in people actually growing into a person who they weren't before, and that they, in many cases, can be happier with that person who they've become compared to the person that they were before their injury or before their health crisis.
What a wonderful concept. We are getting very close to running out of time, and so I think maybe a nice place to stop would be, I want to hear you're standing on top of Mount Everest and you're looking out and you think...
Couldn't see a thing. It was a blizzard after all these years of dreaming about it. All I could do was to look inside of me, and what I saw was this person who was not afraid to live life passionately anymore. I wasn't afraid to take a risk, and I wasn't afraid to move forward in my life with MS. And now I bring people on journeys to help them feel that same feeling, and that's been the most powerful part of it all for me, is coming back full circle and helping other people get
that
their
feeling,
comfort again.
that feeling for themselves.
Yeah.
Thanks so much to both of you
Thank
for
you.
being here. What wonderful guests. Don't you think that they were wonderful guests? And stories of inspiration. Lori's story, and you must have heard other stories in your own life that we can take into our own life so that it gives us the courage to climb our own Mount Everest. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics, resource links, read my blog, the place where I answer more of your questions, and we can continue this discussion there. And tune in for next week's show when we talk about coping with traumatic life events. Our experts will talk about moving through, moving on, and moving forward. I think we call that, as Dr. Heck said, resilience. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night. I've talked with patients.